Theme park employees, please share your juiciest horror stories. I worked on a major roller coaster many years ago. Two preteen boys rode in the front seat and were screaming down the first hill. The ride takes a sharp turn there, and one of the kids managed to have his teeth hit the other kid's forehead. They rode for the next 2.5 minutes, screaming and bleeding as only a head injury can. Came back into the station looking like everyone in the first section had been in a war. A ride they will always remember. That must have made for an amazing souvenir photo. One time, a bird dive-bombed into the funnel cake frying oil and exploded. We had to fish it out. I used to work at a sky coaster ride at a theme park, which is a ride you have to pay extra for that's essentially a giant swing that you have to wear a special harness for. Up to 3 riders can go at once. Several guests commented that it was the most terrifying ride in the park. Once there was a boy, about 13, who was begging his mum to ride with him. She refused but said she'd pay for his ticket to go alone. So he did. Long story shorter, he threw up mid-ride and showered chunks of Skyline chili all over the ride area, including people in line, the guy who records the rides on video, and myself. When we finally got him down, we discovered that he'd also peed himself. So I got to wash the suit before going home. I didn't work there very long. I worked in a water park in a dual park single entrance location of a very common chain of theme parks for about a decade during high school and college. The frequency of adults crapping themselves or pooping in the pool was revolting. 2 stories of note. I was working for a party for the employees and their guests after normal park hours one night, when a fellow supervisor and I noticed some poopy prints meandering down the sidewalk. One employee followed the trail toward the bathrooms, hoping to find a child running frantically to make it. I followed the trail in the other direction, away from the bathroom, praying that I didn't find anything but the end of the trail. I make it about 15 drips down the path heading away from the bathroom towards the lazy river, and look up only to see a gigantic woman built like a house, wearing a floral one-piece. She has a giant brown stain on her butt, and just streams of liquid chocolate running down both legs. She was just strolling along, not a care in the world. I had to spend hours scrubbing the poopy off a textured concrete surface because some huge lady must have gambled on a toot and couldn't care less that she had buckets of brown stuff piling up in her bathing suit. Another time, a kid was floating around the river and just dropped trow and let her rip. It was one massive, and I mean gigantic, poopy. We had to chase it around the current and scoop it out. It was larger than any baked potato I've ever seen and was girthier than my clenched fist, and weighed about as much as a Chipotle burrito. Long story short, never swim in a water park. If a public pool is roped off for maintenance, in my experience it's 80-20 because someone crapped in it and the pool techs needed to shock the pool with chlorine because of cryptosporidium concerns. God, the amount of times the local pool I swam in as a kid got temporarily shut down because of a poopy, and the amount of times that I just jumped back in 10 minutes later after the all clear is making me feel gross. Still, every natural body of water is filled with number 1 and 2, so I guess you just can't win. Employee comes to work one morning after partying all night. Nobody noticed that she wasn't 100%. Security guys later said she seemed fine. She gets to her station on an elevated platform, doesn't follow procedures and falls about 3 stories and dies right before gates were supposed to open. What procedures should she have followed that would have prevented this? While the ride was being test run, she left her post for some reason and went out on a restricted catwalk. She was well aware that this was an off-limits area. Nobody knows why she decided to do that. Witnesses said she was bending over like she was trying to pick up something when she lost her balance and fell. She was probably trying to throw up. Ended up throwing herself up all over the pavement. I used to work at Knott's Berry Farm in Southern California. A little kid went to ride the roller coaster Silver Bullet, a somewhat fast coaster with lots of twists and a couple of loops. I was one of the guys who checked the lap belt and whatnot before the ride took off. The kid looked scared but seemed like he was with his older brother and his friends. All of the kids seemed to be a few years older, and he probably didn't want to look like a chicken. The kid straight up pooped himself. It made the seat extremely moist and definitely smelled of number 2. As you got off the ride, you could see liquid dripping down his leg as he rushed off. People in the back of the line didn't really know what was going on, but the front of the line, as well as this kid's brother and friends who just got off too, definitely knew. Poor guy. We had to shut down the ride for about 2 hours to sanitize it, but played it off as technical difficulties. Former Disney World cast member here. Here are some stories. While working at Club Cool, some father dropped his daughter's pants and let her squat on the floor. I had a standoff with a guest for 3 hours in the Mission Space gift shop because he was trying to steal Vinylmations. Got told a couple of times that I ruined someone's vacation, and I met Warwick Davis. I worked on the cleaning crew at Soak City, Knott's Water Park. Once I was mopping the bathroom and a dad and his kid were using the same stall to pee in, and the kid says, "Daddy, why is your pee-pee so big?" And the dad just laughed and told him his would be that big someday. You could tell he was proud of his junk at that moment. Also, a little-known fact is that the women's bathrooms are 10 times nastier than the men's. People usually consider men slobs, but girls absolutely trash the bathroom, peeing all over the place, leaving sanitary napkins all over it, and other stuff. Also, I wouldn't recommend going into the wave pool or community pool. We frequently found number 2s, sanitary napkins, and other stuff floating in there all the time. Volunteered at a fair one summer in my old town. Some mentally deficient guy got caught tickling his pickle in the haunted house while one of the carts going through the ride rounded the corner and saw him in all his glory. "I get away with this all the time. I just tell the policeman that I was pretending to be part of the ride, because seeing me spanking the mule is horrifying." When I was little, I went to Legoland. I was so excited that I ran up and tried to hug a statue made of Legos, and I cut my eye. And on that day, everything was not awesome. I worked at a crappy theme park for 3 months in my teens. One morning, I got to my ride and there was blood everywhere. Feathers too. So I did my walk around and there's half a goose. It took 3 maintenance guys 2.5 hours to find the other half. Well, now I know where the company Christmas dinner came from that year. I'm kidding. Owners of these places don't even do things that nice for their employees. I'm not an employee, but as a kid, I went to a local amusement park that also had a water park inside it. I was running around a circle that was basically a huge circle of water cannons. Now, most of them had a foam tip at the end, but I happened to run past the only one where it had worn off while some 14-year-old idiot flung it up as hard as he could. It smacked me square in the mouth and knocked me out cold. Since these were in a circle, they just put a drain on in the center so they could run them constantly. My lifeless 8-year-old body got ragdolled into the center and the water diluted the blood so it looked basically like I'd died and bled out. They shut the park down and had to life flight me out of there. Apparently it looked bad enough that the local news was even reporting that I'd died at first, but in the end I just had to get 8 stitches above my upper lip, and now I have a scar and can't grow facial hair in that spot. I operated rides for 2 years. 2 moments stand out. The scariest moment I had was when lightning struck a utility pole below me. My position on the ride was about 50 feet up. It knocked out power to my ride and forced me and my supervisors to unload the ride in the middle of a lightning storm. The second was a guy who was very upset that I wouldn't let his kid, who was a foot under the height requirement, ride. I told him no early in the day, but one of my co-workers let the kid ride while I was on break. The family comes up later and the father, who was noticeably intoxicated, jumped 2 gates and over the tracks to threaten me with a knife. I called security and he ran. Kings Island ride operator here. A kid fricking jumped in the water at one of my rides, Congo Falls, going after a basketball after I denied him permission. I saw him go in and I pounded the E-stop and called it in. Police showed up, security, all of my supervisors, and the fricking kid got away before they got there. So the little jerk caused a bunch of people to get stuck in the ride while we explained the rule about the water. Over at Extreme Skylifters, it's like a ripcord type ride where you swing back and forth on a long cable. Somebody got sick. Literally hurled about 5 gallons of their stomach contents back and forth over a 150-foot flight lane. There was so much fricking spew. We had to call park services to get enough Voban, the absorber, and you could smell it throughout the whole area. While working at Six Flags, maintenance was working on our larger SLC boomerang. The guy was guiding the car back into the station, but didn't look to make sure the floor was back in position. He stepped back where the floor wasn't and fell a solid 15 feet back to the ground. The best part of the story was him looking around, realizing he was in a restricted zone and putting on his neon vest before getting up off the ground. Worked for Disney World's 2005 college program. The full costumed characters aren't allowed to talk, ever. Nearing the final days of the internship, several of the characters would whisper into children's ears variants of, "Only you can hear me. Help me. Goofy will hurt you," etc. Other than that, there was a crap ton of self-deletion happening at the happiest place on Earth. If you're a guest, are hungry, and don't wish to pay Disney's exorbitant prices for food, just lie to a cashier and say you dropped your food or something. Company policy is the guest is always right. Employees are never allowed to argue with a guest. They'll know you're full of it. Oh, and if a cast member ever says to you, "Have a Disney day," this is the secret way of saying F you. The older hotels are riddled with asbestos, though this has likely been changed by now. And with few exceptions, every face character is a major jerk. Oh, here's something I witnessed. At a local park, there's a slide called the Triple Dip. The slide lives up to the name and dips 3 times. A really small kid rode down it once and just started rolling and doing backflips because he was too small. At the end of the ride, he basically just got up and walked away, acting like nothing had happened. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I work in the games department at a major amusement park. I'm in upper management, so I've been around a while. A horror story: I was walking around the park, we call it taking a lap, and checking on all the different area supervisors to make sure they're all set. I get into the children's area and see a game that has about 10 guests waiting to play, but no associate working, so I hop in and start helping guests. After about 10 minutes, they all leave. So I'm teed off because there should be someone working the game, but there isn't. I call the supervisor and prepare to chew them out. He tells me that there should be 2 associates working there at the moment. So I start looking around, knowing that they're in trouble now. Eventually, I climb the ladder to the attic where we keep the stock for the game. I found the 2 associates. The guy was mid-thrust when I blurted out, "What the actual frick?" The 2 were doing the deed in the attic of a game in the children's area. I immediately called security and fired them both. Then I had the supervisor spend the rest of his shift working that game. I worked at an aquarium once. One day this man came in with his infant son and started holding him over the shark tank and pretending to throw him in like an idiot. Surprise, surprise, he then drops the kid in the fricking tank. The kid smacks his head on a rock and starts bleeding in this huge tank filled with sharks. A few people quickly jumped in and saved the kid from being eaten. Goes to show that some people should have just been a stain on the sheets. I worked a roller coaster park, and whenever people would complain that they were lost or had to go to the bathroom, I'd get them on the path to the really expensive bathrooms. I miss playing Roller Coaster Tycoon. Free soda, $10 bathrooms. You monster. My brother and dad were always pulling that crap, charging out the wazoo for bathrooms and maps, drowning unhappy guests, removing footpaths to trap and confuse, making coasters fly off the tracks. I love that game. The narrator is just glad that some people are as evil as he was when he played that game as a kid. But I will say that I wasn't even doing it to win. It just made me feel powerful and brought me joy. Back when I worked at a relatively large East Coast theme park, we had what many called the craziest shutdown anyone had ever seen or heard about. The ride I was working was a dark ride, a motion simulator that followed a track and had 3D projection seats. I was closing in the control room that night where we would dispatch ride vehicles, RVs, and monitor ride cameras and ride control screens. Over the headset, I heard that an intoxicated male couple was coming up to ride. Okay, fair enough. As they were getting on, they were acting slightly belligerent, so I was informed to watch them through the ride by the loader. In Scene 1, the ride has 11 scenes, they began to make out. Fair enough, it happens all the time. I was narrating it over the headset since it was a slow night and we were all shooting the crap. In Scene 3, I saw their hand moving due south, and the next thing I know is that they're standing up in the RV. At this point, I depress the emergency stop and all the ride lights come up with the RVs stopping in place. I then call the ride down, explaining the e-stop is due to a drunk couple standing up. Here's where it gets interesting. They decided to slip their way out of the lap bars and begin climbing out of the RV. I get on the mic telling them to please return to your sleigh. They're also called sleighs. Little did I know I selected all call on the touchscreen for the ride mic, and people down at the ride entrance and passers-by were randomly hearing me yelling, "Please return to your sleigh." I scan the monitor attempting to find them in the ride area and cannot for the life of me find them. At this point, the entrance host calls control to ask what the heck is going on. I explain and he busts out laughing. I hear my supervisor's keys jingling as she runs up to the exit platform as she's laughing from the call over the radio about a drunk male couple standing up and climbing out. Once she arrives, we do a ride evac so we can reset from the e-stop and walk to the track to find the culprits. After about 30 minutes, we can't find them and give up, and start cycling the ride again before going back up. We checked the control screen to see if there'd been any ride doors opened recently, and none had since that morning when maintenance was clearing the ride for operation. At close, we all had to fill out witness statements for security, and we all had a good laugh. The next morning, maintenance tells us they found 2 protection wrappers in Scene 3, the scene that they escaped in. To this day, we have no idea where the heck they ended up. So in short, a drunk male couple escaped the ride, did the deed, and were never seen again. I worked at a water park. It was towards the end of the day and I was pushing the tubes down at the top of the slide. People started looking at me funny and looking around strangely. I started hearing people talking about number 2, but I dismissed it as nothing. Then someone came up to me and told me to look at the platform below us. I looked down and what do I find but a big pile of brown neatly placed on the middle of the stairs. I worked at a low-grade park mainly known for their go-karts for 2 years. The horrors were in the many. We constantly had kids purposely trying to hit you with carts. I witnessed one kid hit my coworker at full speed. My coworker tried jumping over the cart at the last minute, but that was the worst possible action. His knee ended up hitting the kid in the head and knocked him out going full speed into the wall. My coworker then flipped a few times, finally landing on his face. When all was said and done, 2 people were hauled off in an ambulance, one with a concussion and the other with a broken nose and cheekbone, topped off with some busted teeth. My favorite was when a group of rich guys came through and started making bets on who would win each race on the go-karts. The same guy won twice and was quickly up about $1,000. So one of his friends pulled me off to the side and asked if there was a way to make him lose. What people generally don't know is that there's a control panel which controls the speed of the car remotely. This gets used if someone is getting too rowdy or breaking the rules or something of that nature. So I told him about the control panel and he offered me $100 to make sure that the guy who was winning took last place. I agree and he goes off to entice this guy into another bet. This time he bets him $1,000 that he'll take dead last. The guy was bold. He wasn't just going for his money back, he was going for everyone's money. The ensuing 12 laps were the best of my career at that park. Every time this guy got alongside someone, I brought him down a bit. Every straight way, I would drop his speed by about 5 miles per hour. By the end, this guy was furious. He paid up and stormed out of the park. Just because you're the best, it doesn't mean you'll win. The smartest will usually find a way to win. I worked at a certain park for 2 summers. The stuff I saw made me never want to come back as an employee or a guest. I'm going to keep this vague for multiple reasons, but you'll probably guess where I worked. The biggest horror story came from the fact that I spent 2 of those years in fear of losing my job every single day. Food employees were required to sell a certain product to every person who approached the counter. It didn't matter if they just wanted a cup of free water or already had 10 out of each item. We had to try to sell the product to them. The problem came in that there were secret shoppers checking in on this. If they caught an employee not asking customers about the product, the employee could be terminated on the spot. I watched multiple friends get fired because of this. My second year, I had a management position. I thought this would fix the fear. I was wrong. If I or an employee under me didn't sell this product, I would be demoted and transferred to another area. Now I had to make sure that my co-workers were upselling also. My advice from working here: avoid holidays, go early in the week, and learn which rides are the most popular because they will have the longest lines. When the ride operators tell you to empty your pockets, fricking do it. I'm not kidding. I can't tell you how many iPhones, watches, earrings and stuff I've seen fall while the ride was going. Even a wad of hundreds. And it's a really long procedure to retrieve the items. We actually have to shut the entire ride down because you didn't listen. And everyone in line gets super teed off for having to wait more than they already do. Okay, but you pretended that you didn't find the wad of hundreds, right? I'm just saying, you keep that stuff and punish the presumably rich D-bag for his non-compliance. And get that same rush of power the narrator felt whilst drowning his roller coaster tycoon guests. I was a scare actor, a walk-around, at Six Flags theme night for Fright Fest a couple of years ago. I was in costume and heavy makeup. The guests seemed to forget that the actors were actual people and not statues that they can do whatever the frick they want to with. My hair was pulled, and I was often touched inappropriately. Also, people seem to think it's funny to show up to a theme park completely wasted, so I was thrown up on a couple of times. But by far the worst experience in my short time of employment there was when I scared this jerk's girlfriend to the point of tears and peeing herself, and then he punched me in the gut. Not sure if this matters, but I'm a female and my costume made no point to hide that fact. I could have retaliated physically, but I would have likely been fired, so all I could say was, "Thanks, kind stranger," and alert park security. He was thrown out of the park along with his wimp of a girlfriend. I'm sorry, but don't come to a fricking fright fest if you don't want to be fricking frightened. Last year, I was at the Pleasure Pier in Galveston. They have a log flume ride relatively close to the entrance, and I was there to witness the most disastrous throw-up broadside I'd ever seen. As the log was coming close to the drop into the water pool at the bottom, there was a kid in front who was obviously not doing so great. As the log tilted forward and rushed down, this poor kid blew chunks in the front seat. But that wasn't the end of it. Apparently the wind, coupled with the moving ride, blew stomach chunks into the faces of seats 2, 3, and 4. It was terrible, but absolutely amazing. I worked for a major theme park in Orlando while in high school hosting a children's show and managing the nearby kiddie coaster. At the children's show, we were never allowed to break character. One day after a show, the father of a 5-year-old boy told me to explain to his child that everything here is fake. I didn't break character. The father kicked a trash can, screamed, and said he would sue me and threatened to beat me up. He was ejected and banned for life. One of my employees, a high school girl, came into work wearing an eye patch. In front of guests, she told another employee that she had to wear the eye patch because after going down on her boyfriend, she didn't wash her face and woke up the next morning unable to open her eyelid. She had to go to the ER and they had to cut her eyelid open. She was suspended when guests complained about her telling the story in front of their children. I also had to fire a middle-aged woman for eating gummy bears that were soaked in vodka while she was operating the kiddie coaster. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.